So welcome everybody. It is 7 o'clock on the dot. We're very excited to be here for the Friends of the Library Fall program featuring Ben Wolford of the Portager. My name is Janet Fogel. I'm the library director here at Hiram. And I just have a couple of housekeeping notes before I turn it over to Ella Kirk, our president of the Friends of the Library. Just so that you know, this is a Zoom webinar, which is a little bit different than Zoom meetings. So you all have your video turned off as well as your ability to speak, but you will be able to ask questions in the Q&A, and the chat will also direct you, your chat will go to the panelists and the host, which is me. So all of your communication will come to us either way. So you can feel free to ask questions throughout as you think of them. Some of you also asked questions when you registered, and I have made a note of those. And then I'll moderate by asking Ben questions at the end of his presentation. If you do have any questions or anything like that, please feel free to pop those into the chat. You may have seen the notification we are live streaming on Facebook. So you should be able to watch this later as needed, and hopefully it'll get some additional attention for both the Friends of the Library and the Portager. So thank you all so much for coming. And now I'll turn it over to Ella Kirk, the president of the Friends of the Library.
Where am I, Janet?
You should be good. You can just start talking.
Oh, okay. I can't see myself. So I'm like, oh, am I live or not? Anyhow,
Yep,
good evening, everyone. Yeah, I'm Ella Kirk, president of the Friends of the Library at Hiram College, and I'm also a professor of French and associate dean of the college. I'm delighted that you're here this evening, albeit on Zoom, and not in a lovely Pritchard room at Hiram College with the cookies and coffee and other treats that we normally have. But as we navigate our way through this pandemic, we must remember that organizations like ours are ideal for providing and promoting a medium through which we may become acquainted and share our enthusiasm for books and our thirst for knowledge. Indeed, this is our second statement of purpose for the Friends of the Library. I would like to invite you to view our other purposes as our raison d'etre, to throw a little French in there, on the Hiram College Library website. There as well, you'll find other benefits when you become a member of the Friends of the Library. So it is my great pleasure to introduce tonight's speaker, Ben Wolford. Ben is the founder and editor of the Portager, as you may know, a local newspaper news startup serving Portage County, and he is our featured speaker this evening. He's a native to the area. Ben graduated from Waterloo High School and earned a bachelor's degree in journalism from Kent State University in 2011. He founded the Portager in March 2020 to build a strong local news source for Portage County. And today, the Portager's email newsletter and other channels reach over 80,000 readers every month. Additionally, Ben works at Wolford Communications, a marketing firm founded by his father in 1993. Ben is also the language editor at Il Manifesto, an Italian newspaper, which I found very, very interesting. Ben began his career by interning at the Boston Globe, the Columbus Dispatch, and the Dominion Post. He was also the general assignment reporter at the South Florida Sun Sentinel, where he covered Palm Beach County. Later, he moved to New York and was a freelance writer for Newsweek, AM New York, and a variety of other publications. Welcome, Ben, and thank you for agreeing to speak at our program today.
Thank you so much. That was a lovely introduction. I was joking on my Facebook that the list of disparate activities I'm involved in makes it sound like I'm running a series of elaborate hoaxes, but I assure you I'm actually doing this thing somehow. So it's funny, I actually see some people from the past, Mark, Dave, former colleagues that I have worked with at some of those papers over the years. So thank you all for coming. I'm just going to share my screen. so we can see this presentation. I made this presentation today. I usually just speak off the cuff, but I thought this moment deserved a bit more care. Okay, so yeah, so during this talk, I want to talk about the specific project that we're working on, but also how it fits into the broader context of the news industry and how some of the changes affect communities where, when news is diminished in an area, how that affects the community. And then toward the end, we'll kind of talk about how we're addressing that and some of the other ways that other new startups are addressing that problem. As I go, obviously you can drop questions in the chat and then they'll be put to me at the end of the talk. But you can also drop your email address. And if you just leave your email address, you can leave your name or a question or whatever else. But I'll follow up with you directly. They're going to download a copy of the chat and I'll have everyone's email address. So if you want to subscribe, or if you're interested in placing ads, if you're a small business or something, or if you just have questions about the Portager, you can leave your email in the chat and I'll follow up with you later. So you know something about my background. If you know Portage County, you know Waterloo's a small rural school district. My dad graduated from there, actually. My mom graduated from Field. So I've got some roots in the area. And I went to Kent State. I didn't go very far from home for journalism school. I think I was one of the last people to graduate from Kent State with a degree in newspaper journalism. Soon after I graduated in 2011, they realized that sounded a bit antiquated and switched it. I think they changed the name to, like, I don't know, multimedia news or something like that. But I was lucky enough to find work pretty quickly after I graduated. One of my first jobs was actually at the Record-Courier. Roger DiPaolo, who the late great editor of that paper, was one of my first professional bosses. I subsequently worked in newspapers in Florida. My first Florida paper was the Naples Daily News. Then I went over to the South Florida Sun Sentinel, which serves primarily like the Fort Lauderdale, Palm Beach County area. Then I met the person who would become my wife, and we moved to New York. She got a job there, so I quit my job at the Sun Sentinel and moved up to New York with her, and started freelancing. I didn't have a job, so we moved there, and she started working, and I just tried to make it on my own. And it's really a rat race. I mean, I freelanced for a whole bunch of different papers, got a sense of what it was like to just face rejection after rejection and failure after failure, and not be paid very much for the privilege of all of that failure. And after, I think we lived there for about a year, and we decided she and I had both always wanted to travel, so and live in foreign countries, and we were getting to a point where it was like, okay, we're either going to settle down in New York and try to make it work here, or do this other thing we wanted to do, which was live abroad. So we broke our lease. We moved to Thailand with no jobs, a little bit of savings, and really just she's a human rights lawyer, and she wanted to work with refugees. I'm a journalist. I want to report interesting stories. So we literally looked at the map and decided where could we go that satisfies these criteria. And Bangkok is an epicenter of interesting news. They had just had a coup in the country, and the government had fallen into the hands of a military dictatorship. And it's also a country that receives a lot of refugees from neighboring countries, such as Myanmar. So we just went there, and we were lucky, and we both got jobs. She got a job at a nonprofit, and I started working as a sub-editor, which is like a copy editor at the Bangkok Post. And it was in that time that I started my first news startup, which lasted for 4 years, published a quarterly print publication, but was ultimately a failure. And I shut it down after 4 years because it just stopped growing and started shrinking. We were able to commission a lot of really interesting stories, But in the end, there simply wasn't a market for what we were doing. But what I learned from that is that if I ever did another thing like that, it would have to be based around some tangible community that I could plug the publication into and that it would serve. So that I was creating a thing that I wanted, that there wasn't really a huge need in the market for it. So I swore that the next thing I did, if I ever did another project, would be to create a news publication that either satisfied the needs of an existing online community or was based in some geographic location where I could literally go door to door if I had to, introducing people to the concept, and asking them about, what needs can I serve? What would you like to see out of a new publication? But it was called Latterly Magazine. It lasted 4 years, and during that time, we traveled a lot more. My wife got a job with the United Nations. We ended up living in something like 3 or 4 countries. We currently live in Brazil, Brasilia, which is the capital. We've been living there for about a little over a year. And I'm traveling back to Portage County as much as I can, but basically running this publication from a distance of 7,000 miles in the same way that I'm speaking with you from here in Arizona, where I'm visiting my parents. But in some ways, the pandemic was a catalyst for making the Portager even possible. I would not have been able to start this, I don't think, and run it as effectively if the whole world didn't transition to a kind of local, virtual, global, local working and living arrangement where you can be anywhere and still be local. I'm actually even a member of the Kent Rotary Club. I'm the first foreign member of the club. But when I was living in the Dominican Republic, and I was kind of bored. I wanted a new project, and I thought about getting back into freelancing. So I was going to pitch a story to the Atlantic about what happens when a newsroom collapses. What happens if a newspaper stops being the newspaper that it always was and starts being an extractive opportunity for a national private equity firm, for example. What are the results of that? And we have an example of that, of what happens right in our community at my former paper, the Record-Courier. So thinking about this story idea, I called up Roger DiPaolo, who was fired by Gannett 1 month after the company was taken over by Gannett, which is a private equity firm based in outside of Washington. He was their first cut. They've since laid off something like 30+% of the newsroom. They've reduced pages in the newspaper, and they've jacked up subscriptions. I think it's something like double what the subscription cost used to be before Gannett acquired it. And so he was my kind of first source scoping out this story. I asked him, what would have been the effects of, what was it like inside the newsroom? Bad. And what is it like in the community? Also bad. He said that in the time that he was there, and in the time that he, after he'd left, and talking with people in Portage County, he heard stories from people like organizers at local churches who used to get, news about their events in the Record-Courier all the time, but now couldn't get them to run their press releases. And these are things that might not seem very important, like a bake sale or something. But if you're a small church in a rural community, sometimes getting that information in front of large amounts of people for free in your local paper is the only way that you can drive people to that event and raise money that may fund programming for a year. So the effects of a diminished newspaper can be felt in even the services that a nonprofit or a church community can provide to people. Not to mention, some of the documented effects that researchers have discovered as they've looked at different communities where news deserts have appeared, where newspapers have shriveled and died, or if they've contracted to such a point where they're effectively free handouts that aren't really truly journalism anymore. They found that in communities where there are news deserts, you see higher taxes because there's nobody keeping an eye on spending. You see more political polarization because I suspect, and they suspect, because people aren't talking with each other anymore. If you get all of your information from national news sources who are telling you that the other side of the political aisle is the enemy, you begin to believe that. Whereas if you focus on local problems and you're reading a local newspaper, where people with different ideologies talk together and communicate and work together to solve problems, you have lit evidence that the other side isn't your mortal enemy and is in fact your neighbor. You see less civic engagement. People aren't aware of public meetings. They're not aware of what's happening in public meetings. They don't know who's running for office. Sometimes they don't even know that an election is coming up. And the economies are worse, which I thought was really interesting. A newspaper actually, a business section seems like, it's, maybe like a less important part of a newspaper, but business coverage on a local paper is how you learn about new companies that are opening up in your community. That's how you learn about a new restaurant going into town. That's how you learn about a business that might be on its last legs and closing, and maybe reading about that forces a reckoning in the community, and they rally behind it. So a local newspaper can actually stimulate spending and economic growth at a local level. So looking at all this and hearing Roger tell me about his experience with the Record-Courier closing, I realized like this is not necessarily just a feature story that I could write. This is a market opportunity. The Record-Courier under its new ownership is basically pulled out, and I realized that this could be an important thing. This is something that's needed. So I abandoned the idea of writing this thing, and I started working on a business plan. That was in October that I spoke with Roger. I started speaking with people in the community, some of the local gadflies of various areas in Kent, and I talked to some of my high school friends and various people that I knew just to kind of probe the idea. And everywhere I went, I got really positive feedback. I assembled a board, which consisted of Roger DiPaolo, Barb Hipsman, who was a professor emeritus of journalism at Kent State, her husband, who's also a professor emeritus of journalism. He was the commentary editor at the Beacon Journal for many years, and Mike Beater, who is a local entrepreneur in Kent. And with their blessing and help crafting this business plan, we were able to launch in March 2020 with very little startup costs. I mean, you think about other industries where to launch a business requires enormous amounts of capital. You might have an office, you might have a lot of overhead, you might have to hire a lot of people just to implement to create your product or deliver your service. I opened a MailChimp account for $50. Added some people who didn't express their interest on Facebook to the initial list. It turned out to be something like 285 people. And I sent out the first newsletter in March 2020. At the time, I didn't feel like I was ready, but the pandemic had just set in, and people were scared. People were they needed good local information. People didn't even know where to buy toilet paper or which restaurants were safe to go into, let alone know how dangerous the vaccine was and when vaccines, or sorry, how dangerous the virus was, and when treatments or vaccines might become available. There's just a really strong need for information, and we launched the Portager in that context, which I think was a huge head start for us. We publish an email newsletter every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And in the beginning, we didn't even have a website. We would just send out the newsletter. We had a website with a landing page where you could sign up for the emails, but we didn't publish the stories on the website. We just sent out this email. I produced it all myself initially. Eventually, I brought on my sister, Natalie Wolford, who's now our managing editor and helps. We've also hired 2 reporters since we started. And we've launched a website in March 2021. We built and launched the Portager.com, which has grown to approximately 80,000 page views per month. And this window is blocking my view, so I can't see what's there. But today we have over 5,600 subscribers. We have a staff of people in Portage County. It's not all, we're not a Brazilian operation. And we have many freelancers. We have partnerships with the Collaborative News Lab at Kent State, which is run by a former professor of mine, Sue Zake. And so we have a lot of help. Being in a college town gives us the benefit of having lots of students, and also I think kind of an obligation to help students and give them a first entry, for like an initial start in their career. So we've had some interns, and we have had some ongoing collaborations with student journalists. Let's see. Sorry, it's moving a bit slow. In the year and a half that we've started, we've seen anecdotally mostly a lot of positive impacts. One of the best emails I ever got was from Ryan Shackelford, who is he's the director of the Emergency Management Office in Portage County. And the Emergency Management Office is responsible every 5 years for putting together an emergency response plan for the county. And this is it's a 5-year it's a years-long process where they have to get input from every conceivable stakeholder, and what to do if there's a tornado or a flood or a terrorist attack. And they're legally obligated to get feedback from the community, and hold a meeting to gather input. And normally, like, nobody attends these things. This time around, 5 people attended, and and Ryan wrote to me and said, we asked them how they heard about it, and all 5 of them said they heard about it in the Portager. So that's just one little thing. I mean, there's so many events and public meetings and local issues that simply would not have gotten an airing. They would not have been the subject of any public discourse without a local media organization paying attention and distributing that information to a community. Obviously, when you think of journalism, you think about watchdog journalism, like holding officials accountable, and we've done that too. You can see the image on the top right of the young woman. That person was listed in a sheriff's office, like, most wanted list. She had gotten a traffic citation in Portage County and missed a hearing, and because she'd moved and didn't receive a court notice, and found out that she had a warrant out for her arrest because of missing that hearing, when her friends started writing to her on Facebook saying, do you see your face? What are you some kind of criminal? Do you see your face on the sheriff's office Facebook page? She was listed with a group of other very minor offenders in a way that kind of presented them as dangerous. It actually said, do not attempt to apprehend these people. This was a traffic citation. That was just one story. We wrote about the effects of that, of being given the wanted poster treatment. That's just one example. I mean, we've written about toxic work environments in local offices. We've written about public spending that also in the sheriff's office. There was the sheriff's office had given something like $100,000 in raises to the command staff. We would not have known about this if not for a tip, an anonymous tip from someone who said, hey, check out the sheriff's spending. And we were able to submit a public records request and verify that these raises had been given. But you know, they didn't put out a press release about it. I mean, it was something where you had to have journalists whose job it was to look into these types of things and to be available to the community so that they know if they see something that seems suspect, they can ask a journalist to look into it. The second picture is, I like this one too. This was the first Pack the Bus that the Portager was involved in. We worked with a nonprofit called the Rural Relief Food Pantry, Mobile Food Pantry, which via a green bus drives around Portage County to areas that are food deserts and distributes food, which became a pretty valuable service during the pandemic. It's a touchless food pickup service. People who meet certain income requirements can go, and no questions asked, they can pick up groceries. This organization wanted to launch a school related program that would give students basically like backpacks that they could take home during weekends and during holidays where they don't have access to free and reduced lunch at school. This would be like a supplemental food program for them. And we, the Portager, partnered with the Rotary Club of Kent to have the bus parked outside the United Methodist Church in Kent. And during a 2-hour window or something, all the Rotarians and anyone in the community could come and give money and food donations. And as you can see, I mean, they had like, by the end of it, it was like a 3-foot deep pile of all this food, in addition to a couple $1,000s, which they used to buy more food. It was one of the most successful food drives they'd ever had. And you know, something that's just the last thing, this feeling of community, this increased dialogue, this sense of place, especially during the pandemic. I mean, everyone knows what it means to feel isolated now. Everyone knows what it means to not feel connected to the people around you and your neighbors. And so during the pandemic, I really focused on trying to fill that, to create in the language I used and the stories we tell, to make people feel like they weren't in their own little social media bubble or trapped in their house. There's something called Portage County. If you live there, you have automatic membership in this group. And the Portager seeks to tell the stories and represent the voices of the members of that group to each other, so that we all kind of know what everybody's up to. We know what's happening. We know what businesses are going in. We know who needs help. We know what decisions are being made by the people we've elected to serve us. So I think that sense of place is actually the most important thing that we do, that isn't always, is more difficult to measure in a research study or a survey. We are a for-profit. A lot of people think we're a nonprofit, but there was actually a deliberate reason that we decided to go the for-profit route. It really is a personal choice. I mean, there are pros and cons to each of these different models. And actually in Northeast Ohio, our for some reason, we've found ourselves home to multiple local news, hyper-local news startups. I've listed 3 here, but I can think of at least 7 in Northeast Ohio that are doing similar sorts of non-traditional local news reporting. Just checking the time there. So, one of the most, I would say, popular ways to start a local news startup these days is to go the nonprofit route, to get institutional funding from, let's say, the Knight Foundation or a local community foundation in the area. There are lots of sources of funding for this type of thing. Knight Foundation is probably the most prominent, but really, I mean, the Ford Foundation is involved in these sorts of things. Google has invested millions of dollars as penance for disrupting the traditional news industry, and they've helped to finance a lot of these startups. However, there are some cons here. You're always, you get a grant. It might be for a very specific thing that you got to use the money for. It's going to run out. It might pay for a reporter for 6 months, but then what happens after that? So you're always living grant to grant. And it's, to me, the model seems inorganic in the sense that, in the way that Latterly magazine, my first startup, kind of also failed. I mean, it was what I wanted. And I think nonprofits can sometimes, not always, obviously, but they can sometimes fall into this problem where it's what maybe the institutional funder wants, but not necessarily what the community wants or needs. There are cooperatives, which are, let me see. Yeah, so I'm just checking the chat to make sure no one's telling me my time's up. There are cooperatives, which are in the example of the Devil Strip, which is an Akron-based news startup. They basically said, it's kind of the inverse of the problem I just described. They said, we want the community to totally direct our priorities and run this thing. To such an extent that they offered ownership and voting rights to anyone who gave over at least $330, 330. And I think they got a few hundred or a few thousand people who did that or on track to do that, because you could pay in installments. Problem with that, they got a lot of grant funding as well. I think they got about $500,000 in grants from the Knight Foundation and other community groups. However, as we've recently seen with the Devil Strip, it can be very difficult to manage these types of operations. When decision-making is very diffuse, it becomes literally difficult to see who's in charge. And the Devil Strip suffered a catastrophic failure of its model when it was revealed that somehow the organization was $100,000 in debt. No one knew where the money had gone. The remaining board members who hadn't quit were, giving assurances that it wasn't spent illegally. Which, if you have to say that, you're punching up. So we opted for a slightly more traditional model, which is just a for-profit, regular old startup. And the reason I like this, I'm not like an uber capitalist guy, but one of the great benefits of the capitalist economic model is that if people want it, then if it's valuable, they will part with their money in exchange for it. So that kind of validation is very organic. It's a very real, tangible way to see if what you're doing is wanted and if it's working. If the Portager didn't grow, if we couldn't pay for ourselves, I would have shut it down. I mean, it would have been the equivalent of the community saying that this, for whatever reason, we don't really want this. I wouldn't have given up so easily. Which is another benefit of for-profit models, because you can move quickly and you can iterate often. So if you see something's not working, you have data, you can measure the results of the thing you're trying. If it's not working, you can shut it down and try something else. And so that's basically what we're doing. We're kind of in constant feedback with the community, with our readers, finding out what they like, what they don't like, and trying to meet their needs so that they feel like it's valuable. If they feel it's valuable, they'll pay for it. Of course, 90% of startups fail. So there are huge risks in that, and there are big benefits of institutional support. But I'm happy to report that our funding is sustainable, and we're doing well. Like I said, we're over 5,600 subscribers. About 10% of those are paid. We have a unique model, as you can see in the first line of this, how you can help slide. This is the last slide, and then I'll take questions. You don't have to pay. If you don't want to pay, or you can't afford to pay, if you have to think about whether the Portager fits in your budget or not, I don't want you to do that. I don't want you to forego something to get access to high quality local journalism. So no matter what, you can get access to the Portager. There's no paywall. You can sign up for our newsletters. However, hundreds of people have said, this is important, I value this, I can afford this, and they donate some. They don't donate, they subscribe for either what we state as our kind of expressed subscription price, but we also offer a pay what you can option as well. So, we have people, one lovely woman sent me a check for $12 to cover a $1 a month subscription for the year. And I love this. It's like, she was on a fixed income, didn't have much, but wanted to show that this was meaningful to her. So, and you can kind of look at the rest of this. And like I said, if you want to reach out to me in any way, to subscribe or to send us a news tip, or to advertise, or get information, to send information to your employer to see if they want to advertise, please feel free to just drop your email address in the chat. I'm going to turn the light on because it's getting dark in here. Meanwhile, I guess, Janet, if people have questions, I can take them. But let me turn the light on real quick.
Absolutely. And if any of you would like to ask a question directly, if you raise your hand, I can actually allow you to speak while you do that. But while people think about that, we do have a couple in the Q&A. And then also, as I said, we had some folks who had pre-prepared a question. So I'll start with the ones in the Q&A. So the first question was two questions. And you answered the first one, how do you contribute? But also, where do you send information about free programs being offered in the community?
Typically, those, where do we, so wait, sorry, just to clarify, where do the readers send information if they want to let us know about something happening?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, they can send it to me at editors. Here, I'll actually drop, can I chat here?
You should be able to.
Oh, yes, I can. Editors at portager.com. And that'll go to me. But we generally will, anything somebody sends us, we generally run it. And if somebody says, hey, can you run it again? It's like, well, we already ran it, so you should probably buy an ad this time. But yeah, we run everything. So.
Wonderful, thank you. And what are some of the ways you get ideas for news stories?
Almost always from readers or from organizations. I get probably 50 press releases a day from various community groups or government offices. And probably, yeah, and just from people who say, hey, I heard about something, it's, people are talking about this thing in this Facebook group, you might want to look into it. So that's primarily where. But we also, I mean, at the beginning, we were really heavily dependent on what other people were kind of publishing and sending our way. But in the last, I would say 6 months, we've had a pretty stable crew of reporters, and we've been able to kind of more regularly cover local meetings. So yeah, I would say an increasing amount of stories are generated by our reporters who are out in the communities covering local events and local trustees meetings and city council meetings.
Wonderful. And I know that I personally have appreciated much of that local coverage myself. So another question, are there any refugee centers in Portage County?
No, if there are, I'm not aware of them. There's one in Akron, at least one in Akron, which has historically assisted Burmese refugees. I know there's at least one in Cleveland. I'm sure there are many more in Cleveland. But no, they typically, in the United States, refugee centers are typically located in places where there are resettlement programs. So the federal government determines where to resettle refugees it accepts. And so the refugee centers tend to be in the communities where they tend to place people, which tend to be self-reinforcing. So, if there's an influx of Burmese refugees, they tend to get settled in Akron because there's already an existing community of people from Myanmar there. So
I'll take a couple of the pre-asked questions here, even though I know there's one more in the chat there. So I think you answered this as far as ability to support the Portager with ads and subscriptions. But what do you see as the future of your publication? Are you planning to grow more, or do you feel as if you're at a good spot as far as maintaining your financial stability?
Yeah, well, we're lucky in the sense that it's grown every month. Like every month, it's better than the last. I was able to start paying myself a few months ago, so that was huge. So the numbers are pointing in the right direction. But obviously, I would love to scale up faster. I get email. I mean, we're aware, but I get emails from readers who are like, "Hey, you never seem to cover my city," and it's like, yeah, I know. Like, I think about you every day, and so the faster we can grow, the more people I can hire, and the better. Hopefully, I'll be able to manage a larger pool of freelancers I can get people at meetings regularly. So really, like, just expanding our Portage County coverage is not only good for the community, it's good for our bottom line, because the more people, if we cover every Suffield meeting, let's say, people in Suffield are going to start to say, oh, hey, these people are seeing us. This is my publication. And that sense of being valued and deriving value from the publication is what leads people to sign up and to ultimately decide to pay us. So.
And you addressed a little bit the challenges to many newspapers being taken over, but a question was asked about whether there are any lawmakers addressing the issue of papers getting taken over and then being declared a tax loss and shutting it down and things like that. Is there anything else that's being done besides some of the other newspapers like the Portager who are bringing attention to these problems?
Yeah, that's a good question. There have been some government efforts to kind of intervene. I mean, nothing really you can't really prevent a business from acquiring a business apart from antitrust laws, and then deciding how to run that business, and shutting down a unit is a perfectly valid thing to do if you're a business owner. So yeah, I mean, that I doubt we'll ever see any kind of intervention on that level, and I'm not sure that I would want there to be. Like I said, I mean, when Gannett bought the Record-Courier and started selling it for parts, it created a market opportunity that I was able to fill. So, do I want national private equity firms emboldened to hold on to their assets that they don't even care about, apart from the profit they can extract from them? No, I'd much rather have a bunch of portagers cropping up in every county in America by people who are from their communities and actually care. So, to answer the question more directly, though, I mean, is that what's being done? I mean, there was, I forget how exactly it worked. There was some kind of, tax. Oh, I remember what it was. It was like, I think it was something to do with advertising dollars as a way to encourage businesses to place ads in newspapers. I think those purchases could be tax write-offs or something like that. So there's a way to try to get businesses to spend more money on newspaper advertising. And I'm kind of ambivalent about those types of policies as well, because they often have requirements about what counts as a news publication. Like, does a local blogger count? Am I a blogger? Is the Portager just some guy sending a newsletter? Yes, that's exactly what it is. But it's also it's a news organization, and we should qualify for that sort of thing. I can tell you something that the government should be doing. I realized this. So the Record-Courier and other newspapers, they can publish what are called legal notices. So if you're a government entity, you may be required to inform your constituents about some policy change or a sheriff's auction or whatever it might be. And there are requirements codified in the Ohio Revised Code about where you have to place those legal notices. And this thing was written pre-internet, pre-Facebook. I mean, it was written for a different time. And so, the only thing that qualifies in Portage County is the Record-Courier, which has substantially increased its rates for local government. So this is taxpayer money that they're required to spend, and a local monopoly on the purchase of that. So I would love to be able to run legal notices. I mean, as our subscriber count grows, it's only going to make more sense. So this would be an easy way to save taxpayer money and support new startups.
So bringing up subscribers and readership, you may not want to answer this question directly, but how do you measure your readership? So this particular question, there are lots of subscribers, but how many open and read? And then a specific question about a recycling survey in Rootstown, and whether you might be willing to publish the survey. And I can share that individual's contact information.
Okay. Yeah. On the survey, yeah. That sounds like a great idea. Be happy to. Yeah, so our subscriber rates and engagement are actually really, really good. And Google Analytics and MailChimp Analytics give us really detailed insights about what people click on and what types of which shows us which type of stories they're interested in reading. We get our open rate, which is the percentage of people when you send in an email. The news industry's average open rate is about 17%. The Portager's open rate is 53%. And the average click rate, which is the percentage of people who click on any link in the email, is between 3% and 4%. Our click rate is 14% on average, but it's actually, since we began running obituaries, it's more like 25%. So just extraordinary engagement. And then online, I don't really have any basis for comparison, but we get about 80,000 page views a month. I mean, this is traffic coming both from the email newsletter, where people click on a story, which sends them to our website, or on Facebook, or just people going directly to the site and clicking around. So that has doubled in the last, I think, 3 or 4 months. So yeah, I can't explain why this is working. I mean, it's as surprising to me as it is to many of you, I'm sure.
I mean, I think for me, at least, especially, around election season and things like that, it's really important to be able to access the local sources. And it's hard to find that anywhere else.
That's true. It's somewhat cyclical. Like whenever there's an election, we get a huge increase in ad spending and engagement as well. So yeah.
Sure. And speaking of advertisers, do you depend on advertisers calling you, or do you solicit ads?
We have a little line in the newsletter where we say, spend your ad dollars locally, contact us you can actually contact ads at theportager.com. But I don't have a salesperson. I've never really, I think I've reached out to like maybe 3 people to invite them to advertise. But yeah, it's all just kind of people interested in reaching out to me. I think if once we are able to get some kind of business development officer and who can kind of proactively target prospects, hoping that can be a huge increase for us. It's one of the things in the back of my head that I'm just kind of wasting. It's a wasted opportunity for revenue. So
there were more hours in the day and we could replicate ourselves, right?
Exactly.
How about it? Can you talk about the photo here on the last slide? Is it local?
Oh, yeah, that's actually, I wish I remembered their names. I think it's Ryan Tipton and Jennifer something. They are the owners of the Bell Tower Brewing Company. This photo is by, I should have given it a cut line. It's by Mikey Andriolo, who's one of our great reporters, photographers. He did a profile on them before they launched. So. Thank you, Lisa. Put Jennifer Herman. Yep.
Oh, good. Yes, Lisa, I was hoping you would answer because I thought you knew them. She and I have talked about the brewing company. So the Cleveland Foundation, it was announced on Tuesday that the Cleveland Foundation and a coalition of other organizations would create the Ohio Local News Initiative, a nonprofit statewide network of independent community newsrooms. What are your thoughts on the announcement, and how do you see it impacting both the Portager as a news organization as well as Ohio communities?
So this thing is awesome. I have my own ideas about how this can be used. I plan to reach out to them and find out what exactly their plans are. But my understanding of this organization is that they are going to use this model of reporting called the documenters model or citizen journalist model, where basically they're going to recruit people and train them to cover local meetings, and pay them, from what I understand. And the way that would work, I mean, there's an existing, I think it's called the Documenters, I think is what it's called. This already exists in Cleveland. There's already a nonprofit doing this. It was founded by a former plain dealer reporter named Rachel DeSalle. And so I really don't know if that's going to, why they decided to launch in Cleveland when such a thing already exists. But honestly, the way I see it is the more the better. Local communities are desperate for, we've done surveys asking what people want us to cover. And the number one answer is always local government. People, for whatever, I would have not thought that. I would have thought that's kind of boring. That's kind of need to know information and not want to know information. They're not mutually exclusive. Those are your fruits and vegetables of your news diet. And it's also what people want. So maybe people are just thinking more eating healthier. But, if they can send, if they decide to move into Portage County, for example, they mentioned that they might launch in other counties. If they decided to train people to cover local government meetings in Portage County, this would be an enormous benefit to the communities. But it would also help us. I mean, the way I think of it is kind of like in software development, you have something called open source, where people for free build software in a collaborative way and then publish it. And anyone can use that software. They can integrate that code into and manipulate it any way they want, including commercially. So I see these documenters as kind of like an open source program for news coverage, where they're they're going to these meetings, they're publishing what was said and what the minutes were and what was decided. And then we can look at that and we can simply republish that information, or we can say, oh, this makes a great news story. Or we can mine that data and see, oh, there's a trend, government spending in Freedom Township has been doubling quarter over quarter for 3 years. What's going on? So like there are ways that you can, that commercial news startups could use this kind of institutionally funded grassroots coverage to grow the entire news ecosystem and give people better products. So that's what I haven't talked to them about. But I'd love for them to come to Portage County. And if anyone has a connection in that organization, let me know.
Fantastic. And I think we have time for one last question. And you talked again a little bit about this before, but I don't know if you want to add anything to it. So the website of the Portager mentions that communities with strong local news sources have less polarization. We seem to be in an era of echo chamber politics and infotainment. Can you speak about your experience integrating the Portager into this existing world and building support? How was that accomplished, and has there been any pushback? And I think I've seen sometimes on your Facebook page some interesting discussion and debate. So feel free to talk about the challenges there.
Yeah, where to begin? I pride myself in the quality of our Facebook discussions, which is in no small part thanks to my interventions. Like there's comment sections have been an open question for news publications since they were invented. And one of the prevailing strategies is to simply ignore them. Just let it be, and whatever happens, happens. And that was an error. That was a huge mistake. I treat the comment sections on my channels like I do my letters to the editor section. This is a publication that we run, I run, the board runs, and my reporters run. And we take pride in verifying information, deciding, which opinions are based on something and which opinions are based on misinformation or disinformation. That's our job. We see that as our responsibility. So I have just ported that over to our Facebook page. And so if someone, insults someone, I'll just delete it. If they, cite some wacky, pseudoscientist to bolster their claim, I just delete it. We don't publish false information. So that's one side of the thing. The other is, I really try to avoid topics that I know, like national questions that could be localized if we really wanted to, but does it really affect our life very much? Some things are unavoidable. I mean, vaccines, COVID issues, school board, questions about school board policies. These inevitably are local, and we bring them up. But if we can avoid making something that's just going to spark a ridiculous debate on our Facebook page and it doesn't really affect people, we avoid it. We're focused on local issues, and something I've often thought about is how so many local issues do not require any ideology to solve them. If you have information, for example, that an intersection in your community is dangerous, you don't need to be a Republican or a Democrat to rally the community around fixing it. You just solve it. No one asks you who you voted for. You just pave the pothole. I mean, that's how it. So local issues tend to be less ideologically based, and so I think that's how I think about the Portagers. Like, can I tone down? Can I bring people back to some common ground? Is there an issue we all agree with, like food insecurity, safety, supporting local small businesses, stuff like that? Hope that answers the question. I could go on that. I could write a thesis on my thoughts on that one. So
never too late. As somebody who works at a college, it's never too late to get another degree and write a thesis, right?
Don't plant the idea in my head. I might just I don't need another project.
That may be true. I'll leave that decision to you and your family. Ben, I really want to thank you so much for speaking with us today. You know, you were talking about the power of technology, and the technology allowed us to bring someone who normally lives in Brazil to speak with us here in Portage County. And I know many of our attendees are from around the country. And so I'll put an extra reminder in the chat. Of course, if you would like to subscribe to the Portager, you can put that there. If you would like to support the Friends of the Library, you can access that information via the Hiram College Library website. They have a specific page for the Friends of the Library, so please check that out if you're not already a member. The funds for the Friends support purchasing library materials, books, ebooks, journals, as well as other needs of the Hiram College Library. So thank you everyone for attending. It was wonderful to see you. And I hope that everyone has a wonderful evening.
Thank you.